there was a shift then in terms of crowd psychology, attributed to Freud, a shift away from this pathological view, rooted in anatomy and biology, towards the ambient view, where it became less the view, say, that criminals were born with it, were endemically so, pathologically so, but that their behavior was shaped by their surroundings, by their conditions, other external factors, their lot in life, and
Okay.
Sort of Freud saw social bonds. He framed social bonds through the libidinal drive. So say diverted sexuality manifests in identification, so which is our first early emotional ties with another person. So I suppose like when his argument was that when a child sort of instinctively, not necessarily sexualized, but what could be attributed to sort of sexual gratification, behaved in such a way with anyone, obviously would be inappropriate, but with their parents or whatever, there's a constant relay of what's appropriate in terms of behavior, and how that manifests then the erosion of that, the tamping down of the sort of that sexual instinct, manifests in identification. So the love with a father or a mother, obviously Freud was talking about the father. It's an emotional tie, and it's identification. You identify. He'll extrapolate that relationship to a group and its leader, and it's a love for the leader. And this is the group. The group is constituted through a love for the leader, and that's how a libidinal drive sort of constitutes social bonds. Okay, so the love for the leader, you can have, I don't know if there was ever an extreme real life case of total group, a group totally constituted by a love for a leader. But if you imagine, and I know you love your poles, the other side of that dichotomy, that pole, is and I think this is like the anarchist utopian vision of group behavior, is total self-organization. Sure. Where a group comes to work or act like an individual. So if that's the two ends of the pole, all groups basically feature a blended, graded portions of either side of this. And Lacklow argues that this brings us to Gramsci's hegemony, which combines consensus and coercion.
I guess where, and this would be something I would fall short on, this idea of the Freudian kind of love for the father, I guess articulated through, sorry, just to backtrack a little bit, was the idea of the love for the father obviously being quite an essential part of I guess how, I guess the drive of a sort of populist moment how it gets that drive, that dedicated feeling. Is there anything with moving back to a focus on, I guess, the crowd, how the crowd plays part of that I guess that psychology? I'm wondering, is there anything else in that? For example, I guess you said with regards to the Freudian, the remark was made up by the love of the father, which I think was filtered into via the crowd.
Well, a group.
Maybe I sorry, the group.
I think no. That was the start of the sentence. I wasn't correcting you there. I think his example in the book is he's talking about an army, and like
Okay.
the cohesiveness of a particular troop, or I don't know what the fuck size of group of men with guns. The cohesiveness sort of depends on the identification each soldier has with the general or the captain or the fucking sergeant, whatever, whoever the leader is. So
Mhm.
the only not the only the issue, I suppose you could, this is Freud writing whenever he was writing, but you would imagine that an alternative reason why people might fight and die for someone is a love for each other, a love for the group, rather than a love for the leader. But I
Mhm.
suppose this is Laclau's point. It's always a blend between those two poles, the leader or the group. I would imagine the nationalist motivation for fighting for one's country is, again, it is the love of the leader. It's the commander in chief that they're identifying with, that's motivating and driving them and making it the cohesive unit that is ultimately
Mhm.
going to its death for that leader. So there's certainly examples of it, but there you go. That's how a crowd can constitute through a common identification, through the
Okay.
libidinal
Yeah.
drive.
Yeah, sorry. I think my roundabout way of trying to backtrack there, I semi confused myself. I think the idea was that what I was a little unclear of was how the group or crowd psychology worked alongside. I guess that collective love for the father or the general or the kind of I guess the yeah, as we said, even with regards to say nationalism in one's country and how that group, all the constitution of all of those individual identifying, I guess, members or partialities of like a group, um how that psychology actually worked, I guess, with regards to like forward, pushing like momentum forward with regards to a populist drive. I think it was more just, yeah, the love for the father aspect of it. I could understand like how one would come to associate with or identify with, say, a grand idea that maybe has come through in a speech
Yeah,
or through media. But again, I guess how one joins into a group mentality, uh,
through that.
especially through that, I guess, was where I was a little unsure of.
So I think in the first instance, the primary reason of drawing Freud in there is to just dissociate the absurd views of groups that the earlier group psychologists would take, but
Mm-hmm.
ending then on bring the point, bringing us closer to Gramsci's hegemony, and applying that to to Laclau's chains of equivalence and hegemonic struggles.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Consensus and coercion is the combination. So the consensus, and obviously we'll elaborate this further as we go, the consensus is where the subject positions in a movement, in a populist movement, um, forego their particular identity to also identify with um, with one another
Mm-hmm.
in a
Okay.
horizontal chain. However,
Mm-hmm.
this libidinal point manifests in coercion, in the coercive aspect of hegemony, which is where one particularity becomes hegemonic. And it's okay. So obviously, again, it's sliding scale between these things. This is not necessarily to say a populist movement will have an authoritarian um,
A vanguard.
vanguard. Yeah.
It's to say that a populist movement doesn't necessarily won't sorry always necessarily imply that there would be a
A coercive
authority.
vanguard.
Precisely.
Yeah. But to answer your question, there will be an authoritative, uh, centralized, not centralized in terms of organization, but a centered upon particularity that will constitute the identities of the larger crowd. And it's
Mm-hmm.
just you take those three points: coercion, identity, and love, and you just mix them together, and that's kind of what he's talking about. That makes sense.
Okay, yeah. Okay, yeah. No, that makes sense.